And we're live, which is more than I can say for Charlie Kirk. It is Friday,
Too
September.
soon, friend. Too soon.
Oh, stop. It is Friday, September 12th, the year of our Lord 2025. It is 8 a.m. It is, uh, you know, one of those days. I had a long night. I couldn't sleep for some reason, so I got up this morning and I put on the emu shirt because that is the only way to respond to the day. Um, Folks, um, we're gonna get right into it today because Holly has a lot to say about Charlie Kirk. I have never had anything to say about Charlie Kirk in my life, and I'm not gonna start today. Um, um, the sun is shining, the birds are chirping. There are some crows outside of my window who are cawing. It's going to be a great frickin' day, even though I really didn't get much sleep and I'm exhausted. Um, and the cactuses have a message for you.
Oh, okay. Sorry. This was too. It was so soon.
It was too soon. It
I'm
was.
not. You're just like get right into it, and okay.
You're watching Dog Shirt TV, a forking revolution in morning television.
You are watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is a forking revolution in morning television. And as one of the cactuses says, you just like get right into it. Um, and, you know, I'm going to turn the monologue today over to Holly because Holly has stuff to say about Charlie Kirk and I don't. So, go.
Well, I mean, you might have everybody. I feel like everybody has something to say about Charlie Kirk. First of
No,
all,
I don't. You know why? Because I
well,
have nothing good to say about the man.
I
I,
don't have anything good
I
to say.
oppose political violence in all of its
That's
forms,
pretty much
and
it.
I don't spend time, as a general matter, attacking people when they've been assassinated. So, that leaves me with sort of my usual posture about Charlie Kirk, which is I don't think I've ever commented on anything he's ever done or said in my life, and I'm not going to start now.
Well,
But
actually,
you,
you were in that video as well. So
no,
he,
he's commented on me.
oh yeah, okay.
But I've never commented on him.
Oh, I see on
He's
him.
beneath
Okay.
my has generally been beneath my notice, and other than to say that I oppose all forms of political violence, and I think assassinations are heinous and have no place in American political life, or have no legitimate place. They clearly do have a place. Um, just ask Abraham Lincoln. I don't really have much to say about it. I do have stuff to say about the FBI investigation of the death of Charlie Kirk. But you have stuff to say about him. And I thought your Substack actually really nailed it in about 100 different ways. And specifically did not confuse Ezra Klein style.
Oh my,
Um,
that's
uh,
what I really want to talk about.
yeah, did not confuse condemning the assassination with praising him.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna wind you up. Here I go. Imagine the little wind up thing on Holly's back, and I'm turning it, zzz, 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 and press the button. Boom, go.
Well, just as a to start out, not to just center myself in the story, but very unusually, I have a personal encounter with Charlie Kirk, although online. You may remember that the reason I left Twitter was because he targeted me. He got hold of the parody video that Ben was also in, but he didn't even mention Ben, which is odd because Ben is the far more famous person. But and then he somehow knew that I had recently left the CIA. And so he wrote a post. He got my name wrong. He called me Molly, which was a mercy. It would have been all very much worse if he had gotten my name right and properly tagged me on Twitter. But nonetheless, so he insinuated that I was the deep state, and here is an example of a CIA, person who doesn't like the president and is like secretly plotting behind the scenes. And anyway, the facts, I have another post where I lay out all the facts of the case of when I post the video, when I resigned, also if I was still working there, I still could have been within my legal rights to post the video, and I went through the Hatch Act. Anyway, he was factually wrong on a number of issues, but he unleashed a real torrent of abuse of Molly. Most of it was to Molly and not to myself, but that really was scary, actually. I don't, unlike Ben, I'm recently have any kind of public profile, and I have a very tiny, tiny, tiny one. So to be called out by someone like Charlie Kirk, and then Elon Musk like glommed on to the post as well. Yeah, I didn't know, people complain about public figures, people say, oh, they're afraid and that's why they don't speak out. And I've usually poo-pooed that, like, But I have to say, just when you're sort of focused on like that, and like just like thousands of people, actually the video ended up having 1 million on Twitter, which I'm no longer on, ended up having like 1.5 million views, with lots of horrible comments, personal comments, about my appearance and my singing, which my singing is not good. That's kind of the point. But
Hey, you're singing great. I think, no, I mean, you are,
it's not soloist material,
no, but
but it's fine.
that's the joke.
Carol says my singing is fine, and that's the
Yes,
adjective I
exactly.
would use. It's fine. So
Holly's singing is
no one's going to
far
pay to
better
hear me
than
sing.
any other CIA Africa analyst who's decided to be a public
You,
figure and write a Substack.
yeah,
I mean,
okay, fair enough.
like you have to define the
Yeah,
denominator
yeah,
correctly.
exactly. So anyway, yeah, so I didn't know what that felt like until that happened, and it felt really bad. Like the immediate, I mean, after a little time passed, then it became funny, and then I sort of calmed down when I saw that there weren't going to be mobs of people showing up at my house, etc. But in the immediate, like my immediate reaction was like serious fight or flight, like adrenaline rush, and like sick to my stomach, and and then I like pretty immediately after that, deleted my profile. But my husband kept going on and lurking and seeing what they were saying, and it was not good. And if I had been reading all of that and seeing all that and trying to stay on Twitter, which I was thinking of leaving anyway, it would have been pretty awful.
Well, I think that we should create like a fake version of you named Molly Berkley Fletcher,
Yeah,
who should have a very active and inappropriate Twitter following, or Twitter presence. Anyway, that's a different subject. So, okay,
it
so
says
Charlie
MBF,
Kirk.
which is very close to MBS. I don't know if that was the intent, but
Well, I've always thought your
no
actual
hacksaw
avatar,
murdering.
which is, you should be Holly. I forget your actual tag, but it's very close to Holly Berkeley as fuck Fletcher or something. Holly Berkeley is,
Holly ABF.
yeah, I think it should be Holly AF.
Okay.
Um,
Well,
uh,
that's anyway, all that to say is I I oddly have a weird and then I made a follow-up parody video after I had calmed down a bit and regained my courage, of the horrible Christian contemporary Christmas carol, Mary, Did You Know, which is like literally that song it's just so asinine. It's and it's as if mansplaining was a song, that's it, because it's a male singer songwriter who came up with it, and he's basically asking Mary, the mother of Jesus, did you know that your baby was gonna do all these things? Did you know that? And it's like she knew, asshole, because an angel like appeared to her, and then she went on and like went on a whole Magnificat, which is like a huge chapter in the Gospels, where she goes on and talks about how she did know. Now she may not have known every detail, but when you're like a virgin and an angel appears and tells you you're pregnant with the Son of God, like that's something that kind of clues you in. I mean, assuming you believe all that, of course. But the songwriter does. He's a Christian, so he would believe that, and he would have read the Magnificat and the whole thing. And yes, she knew. Okay, so it's like if mansplaining was a song. Anyway, I have a whole thing with that song. So I parodied it. Charlie, Did You Know? And one EJ Wittes helped me with the research, and basically calling out just his complete missing distortion of Christian teaching and gospel teaching. So that's my personal little history with Charlie Kirk. But I want to say, obviously, his assassination is really a crime against democracy, and all of us, because this is a free society. And as horrific as Charlie Kirk's views were, and his expression of those views and his tactics, like I would I would die for his right to say all those things, just the way I would die for my own. And I would protest his right to say, to speak out. And I will say that he did, do these debates. Like he did sort of go out, and what people are praising him for, which I think is a bit over the top, but nonetheless, he did go out and debate people who disagreed with him, and was willing to do
Right.
that, and that's what
So
he was doing.
here's my question. So Ezra Klein wrote a very laudatory, exacerbated by a headline, but which probably isn't his fault. But did he go out and really debate people, or did he just go out and yell and propagandize? I mean,
Well,
there's
he
like real debate and real engagement, and then there's I gather my flock, you gather your flock, and we, strap horns on the sheep and let them charge at each other. I don't have a sense of him because I've literally never paid any attention to him. Did he really go out and debate people,
oh,
or was he just an
so
asshole?
he did. I would say he did. He would go to, his big thing was he would go to college campuses, and he would invite anyone to sort of challenge his views. And most of the people, now he had the mic, he basically, it was on his terms and on his platform, and he then I'm sure he edited video and then marketed it out to make the other person look stupid, etc. But they could show up and debate him. And frankly, some of the video he released was embarrassing to him, I thought. A lot of times I mean, his views are repugnant. So I feel like that's, fairly easy, but he was usually surrounded by his cheering section, and but liberal students could and did go to the microphone or sit down. Sometimes he would have a table, and they would come and sit down, and they would have like a debate. And so that's good. And I would laud him if it were the old days when conservatives and liberals sat down and had a good faith debate, within the parameters of, a civilized democratic society, where you don't lie and you don't make shit up, and you don't use racial bigotry and misogyny and all of these other things that Charlie Kirk did on the regular. Then I would say, like, that's fantastic. I think that's what we should do. The problem is not his tactics were good in terms of well, his show is another matter, but in terms of debating people and allowing people to come debate him, um, great. The problem is, words matter. Like, look, rhetoric matters.
So look, I mean, I also let anybody come debate me if they want, and nobody spends any time praising me for that. I think that's a pretty low bar, actually.
Well, I
And
mean, it speaks to where we're at as a society, and also where the conservative, if you even want to call that anymore, I would call it a fascist movement is at. Like most of these people probably wouldn't do that. They wouldn't expose. They generally, like Trump when he's challenged, he doesn't engage on any. He just like yells at the person and tells them they're stupid. You
it's
know,
true, although he also takes a lot of questions,
he does, but
including
then
from
he
hostile people. I just don't think participating in debate is a particular virtue. I think it's a feature of I look, I'm not going to criticize him for it. I just was very surprised that, Ezra Klein thought it was, you know, obituary worthy, that this was a a person who participated in debate. He was a
He
provocateur.
was a provocateur, he definitely was. And by the way, he promoted violence on the regular. He promoted beating and even killing migrants. He advocated for public executions. He obviously was a big fan of ironically, he was talking about guns when he was shot. I don't think that could not have been foreseen because the shooter was far away, and these questions are not like it was a liberal questioner. It wasn't a pre-planned thing, I don't think. So that's just a very sad and ironic coincidence. But he was actually talking about guns when he was shot, and he also was, he his organization bust people to January 6th. There was a brief moment where he was, as with so many people, was horrified by January 6th, and he took all of those tweets down. And then since then, he has excused it. He was a big, basically whatever Donald Trump does, he's a fan of. So he was pardoning the January 6ers, saying it was, minimizing the violence. I'm not for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if he had fed into the false flag narratives of January 6th. So, he was not a good person. I mean, okay, I'm not going to say that. He did not do good things. I do not know the man's heart or how he was as a father and a husband, although he was a misogynist. So he was a big fan of women submitting to men and not working. And he
Taylor
recently
Swift.
he recently told a 14-year-old girl that the main reason women should go to college was to find a husband. He so again, like I don't know his heart or whatever, but I would say based on his actions and rhetoric, he was not a force of good in the world. I can say that for sure. Um, so I don't and and then but obviously as I said, his assassination is an attack on all of this. And frankly, as someone who was an opponent of Charlie Kirk and everything he stands for, I am furious at this fool who did this because this only helps Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk, let me tell you, as someone who swims in the waters of white evangelicalism, and slash Christian nationalism, of the overlap of which is, I don't know if it's growing, but it's extensive, and it always was, to be frank, because I grew up in this, and it was all there except for the active opposition to democracy. That was not present when I was growing up, but the rest of it was all there. And one of the centerpieces of Christian nationalism is a Christian, specifically white Christian American persecution narrative, that Christians are somehow persecuted in America. which is laughable. They are, even before they gained a strongman in the White House, who basically is a horrible, I'm going to say that he's a horrible person because I've seen no evidence that even he's a good father. So he's a horrible person, and he's using them as authoritarians do often use religious people. By He basically, especially fundamentalist religious people, because their beliefs are so easy to capture and put out there. They have their strict litmus tests that can be, rewired to one's benefit. So he's been using them this whole time. He's not a Christian. He's a terrible person. And but even before that, like, nobody, you can go to church. You can believe what your churches are tax exempt. You can have your schools and your movies and your books and create your whole subculture. The main thing that they've been angry about is that the dominant culture does not believe what they believe, and that's been growing
And
over
looks down on them.
and looks down on them, which again, like, you do not have that guarantee in America
I
for your
didn't. Look. I didn't say there's any. I didn't say there's any. You have a right not to be looked down on. In fact, I think you really don't have a right not to
Yeah.
be looked down on. But everywhere that people are looked down on, there is a subculture with a victim complex about it. Particularly, I mean, I'm thinking of, the Haredi culture in Israel, where, secular Israelis uh, feel with great justice that they are carrying the entire burden of the security of the, not just secular, but also conventionally religious people, are carrying the entire burden of the security of the state because the ultra Orthodox refuse to be drafted, and the ultra Orthodox regard the expectation that they would be drafted as a sort of front to their special place as authentic, carriers of the flame. Anywhere that you have secular uh, elites looking down on traditional religious people, you have this victim complex, and persecution complex. I don't think it's just a white Christian narrative here.
Okay, but as the tenet of those faiths, I mean, Jesus literally said with his own word, again, as recorded in the gospel. I don't know what he actually said, but he said, if people look down on you because of your faith, like, that's great. Like, expect that. He literally said that. It's a verse in the New Testament. And also, I mean, as a Christian myself, I would say the things that they are being looked down upon is usually because they're mean to people. Like, it's usually for their cruelty to people.
Look, I'm not saying that people shouldn't look down on them. I'm not saying that they don't do some things to earn it. And
Anyway, all of
Leora
the
correctly points out that an additional component of the Haredi issue in Israel is that a lot of the men don't work and are subsidized by the state. I'm not saying that anybody's resentments are inappropriate, merely that this is a quite cross-cultural thing
sure.
of and by the way, I mentioned the Haredi example because it's one with which I have a lot of familiarity. You could say the same thing about Turkish secularists and the Erdogan people, right? This
Yeah.
is a quite
Okay. But
cross-cultural.
I've all that taken, and is not my point. We're far afield from my original point, which is that a persecution narrative has been a centerpiece of Christian nationalism all along. And in fact, especially, and the white piece is actually key because it was with the civil rights movement. You cannot separate out the white evangelical narrative from the racial narrative in the United States. And it was actually in reaction to the civil rights movement that the religious right was even born, and the racial piece of it, the loss of sort of racial place and the idea that hierarchies in society. White evangelicals love order and they hate chaos. They love order and certainty and hierarchy as an extension of that. And so when all of those things started coming apart in the 1960s, that was the reaction to it. And so then the narrative became the Christian nationalist narrative that has developed since then and is now in full flower, is that because Christians are persecuted in America and have lost a place at the top, which is what was intended from the beginning, they've rewritten American history on that front, then we must, like, by any means necessary, there's something called the Seven Mountains Mandate that's become popular in these circles, and it's like the 7 pillars of society, cultural and political, and the universities and various entertainment, etc., that Christians have to basically gain power over all of these things in order to rescue the culture. But really what it's about is securing their own place at the apex of that and their own control over, America. So his death, unfortunately, is playing, and I'm seeing it from my loved ones. Not only I am sickened, frankly. People I didn't even know what, they're kind of low key about their specific beliefs and, politics, are posting. Good people I really, are sweet people and lovely. And I can't imagine them saying anything that Charlie Kirk has said themselves. They are posting these just overwrought, this celebrating his faith. Again, playing into this idea that he's a Christian martyr, that he died for his faith and his Christian faith, and that this is somehow persecution for Christianity. It is, I mean, it is, I've had to kind of stay off Facebook because there's so much of it in my feed. And I do not feel, I don't generally get into Facebook fights on other people's pages. If they want to comment on my page, I'll engage, but I don't tend to go into other people's pages. But it is just horrifying. And it's like, to me, it's like that Charlie Kirk would be held up as any kind of remotely legitimately in his, again, I'm not judging his heart. I'm saying his actions and his behavior. He bears no resemblance to the teachings of Jesus Christ at all.
Carol,
I just wanted to go back to what you were saying earlier, Holly. Well, a couple of things. One, yes, there are other groups that have a persecution complex, but for example, the ultra Orthodox in Israel want their stuff to be accommodated. They don't want to impose it on everybody else.
a lot of it they really do.
But they expect
For
everyone else to
example,
defend the nation for them. Is that
for
right?
for
Right,
example,
right.
they want quite dramatic subsidies for their own lifestyles, and they impose all kinds of religious rules on other people. They try to prevent buses from running on Saturdays. I mean, they're not. Their position would be and they are the political power brokers of the country. They're because of the way they've organized politically, and their propensity to vote in bloc. And so they actually are the kingmakers that control a lot of people's political fates, which they exercise with um, let's just say, less than extreme delicacy.
What was getting to me, where I really wanted to ask, though, and I've been thinking about this for a while, so I thought this was a good opportunity because it's related to what we've been saying. I understand the whole persecution complex. What I don't really understand is how that justify. I don't. I'm struggling to understand why it is that in order to not be persecuted, that means that they have to impose all of their morality on everybody, all of the blanket anti-abortion stuff, for example, for which there's no exemption if it happens to go against your own religious beliefs. And so it's not just the idea of not wanting to feel persecuted, it's partly how they define being persecuted and not being persecuted.
Well, I mean, so they wouldn't see it as, they don't see it as imposing. So for instance, okay, this is an example. I think the abortion issue, I'll get back to that because I think they're, they actually, there's a little bit of a different argument there. But let's say with the LGBTQ stuff, which which is another big one for them. So they would say that, for instance, let's say, a Christian professor who is anti-LGBTQ because of her religious beliefs at a secular university would maybe have a hard time getting tenure or maybe even be fired or something like that for something that they said. And they would consider that not imposing their beliefs on, that they would see that as being persecuted for those political beliefs. They're not able to really separate but it goes beyond that. I mean, just the existence of gay marriage. They don't seem to be able to separate out, like, this is a secular society, and if gay people want to get married over here, that doesn't preclude any of your teachings over here. Like, you can think that homosexuality is a sin in your church, and they're even allowed to, there's Christian colleges.
That's what I don't understand, why that isn't recognized. I mean, one of the things I saw a while back, and this is getting a while back, that struck me was people saying, well, I have no problem with civil union for same-sex couples, but marriage. And just like, look, legally, marriage is a civil union, right? We're not saying that you have to have it done by your church. That is a religious
Well, obviously,
thing.
I agree with you, and I think it is an imposition. I do not think that they're persecuted or their views are persecuted, but that's how they see it. They see
I'm just trying to make the connection between wanting a separation where everybody has their space, but how that makes it persecution.
Well, I mean, the truth is they're not wanting a separation. There is a cultural anger that they've lost the culture, like including their own children. The fact that this is really the key point, I think, of the last 20 years is the exodus from particularly white evangelical
They're protecting their
churches
children from the
by their own
subversion.
children. I mean, look at me. So I was raised as hardcore white evangelical as you can possibly be, by like legitimately top tier people who would go across the world for their faith. That's who raised me. And I was literally raised, I did not have a single not non-Christian friend, non-evangelical Christian friend until I was in graduate school. I mean, you could not, and I'm now writing books about condemning the.
Okay, but Holly, this raises a really interesting question, which is then who are Charlie Kirk's followers, right?
Well,
He's
I mean, that's one of.
31. Um,
No, he's there's plenty of young people. It's just statistically significant, the number that is left. He's getting, in fact, and he's getting new followers that are not even religious. I mean, that's why he was so important to the Trump coalition. Not only is he sort of bolstering the religious right, but he was attracting. His whole thing was young people in college campuses. And his organization, from what I've been familiar with, was incredibly good at organizing, getting out the vote, again, convincing, proselytizing their particular views. And apparently he had tremendous appeal to these young people, particularly young men. I think there's been a lot of articles written about young men, white men mainly, but not even even some men of color, young men attraction to MAGA. And I think it's pretty simple. MAGA and particularly the religious right wing of MAGA, basically, I mean, they speak to the loss of male power. They speak to the sense of male entitlement. They speak to the idea that women are basically here or should be here to serve men. And if you're like a young man, like that sounds pretty good to you, right?
Oh,
Especially
I mean, I
in
think to
Me
go
Too.
back to our crisis of masculinity conversation the other day, one thing that Charlie Kirk is, at least insofar as I understand him, his oeuvre, and I say that I've never read him, I've never listened to him, I've only heard him talked about and quoted. But one thing that he clearly is an attempt to answer that question, right? It's like, what are men for? And his answer is to, to be the guardians of a society, of a white Christian society that resists all these trends and mocks all these trends, whether it's, submit to your husband Taylor Swift, or whether it's, that, like, it's to resist all these trends of modernity that are, you know, pushing traditional masculinity to the side.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you said, key mock, that's key because they have felt mocked. And so, and his tone was very mocking, and his sort of setup at these college campuses was that he would, people would come debate him, and he would, the sort of advertising for it was that he would then humiliate them. And sometimes did, because not, I mean, he was, there's no
Well, he's
question.
a pro and they're not.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so sometimes, I mean, that's an unfair fight. If you're somebody who talks for a living and you know how to do this, you have a really, really unfair advantage over people who don't. I want to change the subject a little bit and talk about the investigation, which has been actively being discussed in the chat. There is apparently a new person in custody. I am not going to talk about that because it is unfolding right now, and I don't we don't I don't have a lot of confidence that this time we know it's the actual shooter rather than somebody who was um, uh, identified as a suspect too early. But let us assume that either this time or soon they will capture the person. They seem to have a lot of data related to him. It seems to be male. Um, uh, I want to say, and I would be interested for Kate's thoughts if she's here.
He's
Uh,
here.
but it seems to me that we have seen, and I wrote my column on this yesterday. Um, uh, it seems to me that we have seen at least preliminary signs in this investigation of some of the decline of professionalism that we've been worried about here for the last several months since we started seeing the attack on the FBI. And I want to flag a few things that are at issue in this investigation, visibly based on the public record. Number one, um, uh, Kash Patel's propensity to discuss things in public in real time and elevate his social media and Dan Bongino's social media over things like investigative accuracy, timing. So you saw that with him announcing that a suspect or a subject, as he put it, was in custody, and then an hour later tweeting that he had been released because he wasn't the shooter. You also saw that with respect to really clashing state and federal statements in press conferences. And the New York Times this morning has a really intense account of Patel's meeting with the line agents, in which uh, he and Bongino describe themselves as under intense pressure to produce a suspect here. Um, but I do think there are some other issues going on. Number one, um, we've heard a lot about field office firings. The head of the Salt Lake City field office, who was a Pakistani American woman, was removed 3 weeks ago. The guy that you see on these press conferences has been in office for a couple of weeks, I think. I hear good things about him, and I don't want to cast any aspersions or throw any shade at him. I'm sure sounds like he's a serious person, but I don't, that's not a recipe for that kind of leadership turnover, is not necessarily a recipe for investigative effectiveness. And then there's the fact that the Bureau has pulled a very large number of people off of domestic terrorism investigation, both because they're deploying a lot of people to immigration matters and because they're actively de-emphasizing domestic terrorism investigations because they don't want to focus on political violence by white people. And so my question, and Kate, I'm very interested for your thoughts on this, is um, how much of this can we see in the conduct of this investigation, and how much of it is like a climate change thing where, you can say, well, investigations in general are likely to be less effective than they would have been, slower, whatever, but you can't attribute any specific thing in any specific investigation to the changed climate. What do you think?
I don't know. I'm very, excuse me, hesitant to comment just because of my lack of experience on the crim side. National security and criminal divisions in the FBI, in my experience, were very, very different. I mean, I remember the 2015 or like 2015, 2016, and there was, Fox News was on all of the TVs all the time, no matter where you were in the FBI. And I remember one time, like in national security, it was very non-political, very non-political. I think I had a Jeb sticker, and I think I was like the only person, and like I didn't even have it like out on my desk. It was like in my drawer. And and I remember I was in the gym and there was one of the guys on the crim side, and he was like railing on Hillary and how if Hillary becomes elected, we're gonna have the biggest crime family ever in the White House. And I was like, oh, well, that did not age well. But so my point though is that it's a very different kind of environment, and I know a lot of people actually, a lot of the agents want to be on the crim side because it's very like bank robbers, it's very like actionable. So at headquarters, every agent who wanted to get promoted had to do a stint, an 18-month, it's called TDY, temporary duty assignment, into headquarters. And you could always tell when agents came from the crim side into headquarters. I was in national security. I was in counterterrorism there. And even you'd think like counterterrorism is still a little bit crim, but it's not at all. I mean, we would get these drug SACs or drug agents, and they would, I mean, I remember one time this guy from LA, the drug squad came in and he literally asked me, he's like, where's Palestine on a map? He asked me where Palestine was. And I was like, if you mean Israel, it's here. But I don't know what, so it's very different. And so my point is that I don't know who this new SAC is. Did you say he came from the cyber division? Okay. I thought I heard he came from the cyber division. And so I guess I'm not sure if it's just kind of, they're just very inexperienced. That at the same time though, I'm also very hesitant to comment because I've never seen so much communication from the FBI during an investigation ever. So, you know, a lot of this could just be, they're just getting ahead of their skis. I mean, I worked on the Boss Bomb attack, and I was kind of constrained I was in this, in PSYOC then, which is the main communications thing or operation room. And I mean, it was just a shit show trying to find these guys. So, and I can't imagine Mueller in there tweeting, "Oh, we have a lead in Tampa." Like,
Right, exactly.
So, and then it turns out to be nothing. And then an FBI ends up shooting the guy. Like, so I don't know. All investigations are shit shows. And so I don't know how much of this is just a shit show because we're seeing more of it, or if like they're just really, really incompetent. I mean, they are really, really incompetent. So that goes without saying. But I worry that they're mixing crim and national security. And I just think they're very different environments. And I wouldn't really want someone, the most capable of my agents doing counterintelligence work, I wouldn't want them to do an investigation on the manhunt. I mean, it's just very different. I mean, I'm sure they're trained all really well at headquarters, but as far as experience, like on the ground, I don't know. So, like I said, I don't really have much more information. I think it's a combination of both. But at the same time, I know what it's like to be on the other side of that and have the media commenting and speculating on stuff that they have no idea about. And just being like, you guys have no idea. So again, I don't really want to judge if it's incompetence yet.
So I completely agree with that. I think the most that we can say, and what I said in my column yesterday, is there are certain things that you can flag as irregular,
Right.
like Patel's tweets. Um, and by the way, you could do that before this investigation. He was doing that during the Bolton raid. Um, I was literally the only person there, and the New York Post has a story about it that is coordinated clearly with the director's tweet saying FBI agents on mission. So I mean, there was clearly a decision at the Bureau to disclose an ongoing matter. And leave aside the propriety of that, it's completely irregular.
Well, and I think the real problem with that too, is it goes to show where their priorities are. Again, I was sitting 3 people down from Mueller during Boss Bomb, and I cannot imagine him getting on his phone and fucking tweeting. Like, even if you're like, okay, it takes 5 seconds to tweet,
Ever.
but like,
Not just about that, but like
what? But like,
the idea of Bob Mueller sending a tweet.
well, I know. Okay,
that argument
you know what I
proves too
mean, though. I mean, even coming in and telling his PR person to put out a statement, like that's not where your head should be. And even though it
Right.
takes 5 seconds to do that, it still takes away your focus, and it just shows the unseriousness of these people and the fact that they're more concerned about performing for the boss or the people or the right-wing media or their podcast audience and not really doing anything. And that's because they don't know how to do it. I mean, they just don't. And so the only thing they can do is perform and look tough. And again, it's the same thing with the Secretary of War and bombing a boat, because you don't know how to solve any problems. You just know how to look like you're doing something.
John, you had a question.
Yes, and Kate, stick around for this. So the chat was discussing whether or not there was a federal crime here, and I had then asked, well, is a federal crime required for the FBI to bring in resources?
So the FBI is always allowed to, if it wants to and it is asked to, support state law enforcement with investigative capacity. Um, there is also any time you have used a gun that has moved in interstate commerce,
Oh, the
there,
Commerce Clause.
yeah, there, you, like, if you had to jerry rig, um, there are potential terrorism statutes that could theoretically apply. Um, uh, and so, is this likely to be prosecuted as a federal matter? I suspect not. Um, does the FBI have capacity that state law enforcement doesn't have? Absolutely. And is it a fairly routine thing for them to be brought in on something like this? Yes. So I don't think the fact that there's an FBI matter, particularly when you have a suspect who's on the loose who may have crossed state lines, you don't know, right? Um, bringing in the Bureau for a manhunt is a fairly normal thing to do. Kate, do you have further thoughts on that?
No, I was trying to figure out what a federal crime would be aside from them asking for help and Trump just dispatching his you know his federal force.
And
Um
I want to be clear, the question was not intended to suggest there was anything wrong with the FBI being involved. I mean, I do think when there are crimes that touch the national news in the way that this does, it's not inappropriate. But that's my lay feeling about it, rather than
Yeah, what I would say is,
could it be considered terrorism? Is that what you said? Domestic terrorism? Did you
well, I said there are terrorism statutes that might apply, and I'm struggling to think of what they would be, right? So the normal thing that triggers federal jurisdiction in terrorism cases is two things. One is some nexus or suspected nexus to a foreign group.
right?
And the second is the use of an explosive device other than a firearm,
Mm.
because the federal weapons of mass destruction law is broad enough to incorporate a lot of
So would like
firecrackers.
a shooting outside an abortion clinic be considered
So
terrorism?
So that in that uh, there is a specific the FACE Act, which
Oh, that's right.
uh,
Yeah,
right.
because that's
So
based on
abortion clinics are a special category
territory.
of federally protected activity. But uh, so, look, if you use a bomb rather than a gun, you're going to trigger federal jurisdiction. That's why, the Boston bombing is federal from the get-go. If you shoot somebody who's a federal official of any
Right.
kind, you're in Fed land. Charlie Kirk's not a federal official. So I think this is presumptively a state thing. But if a state asks for
Yeah.
investigative help and the feds want to provide the help, they're always allowed to do that. And so, it doesn't mean they're the primary agency, or that the lead, if there's really a suspect in custody, see whether he's arraigned in federal court or in Utah state court. My suspicion will be the latter, and that'll indicate that Utah is that the Department of Public Safety or
I feel like
whatever
they're
they
going to
call it
try
in
to get him into
Utah.
federal court, though. I just have a
Yeah, but
feeling.
then you do need a federal statute. And I don't know what that would
but
be
all of these are
offhand.
irrelevant to the investigative resources question, or the
Correct.
manhunt.
Because they can ask the FBI for help for any,
Yeah.
right? Isn't that a
Correct.
state? Yeah. I just
Um,
have, and can I just make a couple points in our waning few minutes?
yes, indeed.
First of all, I'm seeing online on our lefty blue sky space, um, people are already doing the whole false flag thing, and just stop it. Like, just stop it. I mean, until there's actual evidence of that, like, just don't. This is
Although
no
I
doubt.
can I just add a flip side to that coin? if you're on the right and you're saying this is left political violence, stop that too. You know,
Yeah, although I
nobody
think there's a
knows
more
any,
presumption of that.
no, nobody knows anything about the motives of an assassin until you know the motives of an assassin. Could it be a disgruntled former TPUSA
Okay.
staffer? Yes. Could it be somebody going through a mental health crisis? Yes. Could it be somebody with fucked up political motives from the left? Yes. Could it be somebody with fucked up political motives from the right? Yes. And the assumption if a conservative gets killed that it was by a liberal is a dumb assumption. And the assumption that if a liberal gets killed it was by a conservative is a dumb assumption. And people should stop mapping this onto their pre-existing political desires
I would
about who would
say
want to kill Charlie Kirk.
you're correct. I would say that, you know, it's more likely that I mean, he's very much a political figure, and and I can't say that word, um, lightning rod. And so if you're just, you know, I think it's likely. But anyway, setting that aside, the other thing I wanted to say, just stop with the false flag bullshit. And then the other thing is,
Stop with the motives bullshit.
all
If
right,
there's
fair
a
enough,
suspect in custody, we'll find out about his motives. If he's issued a
fair enough.
political manifesto, fine, read the political manifesto. Right now, all we know is that he's male.
Okay, well, fair enough. Okay, second point is Trump is already like, did you see what he put out yesterday?
Yeah.
He's basically already saying he's going to go after liberal free speech
Well, and what's more
as a
concerning is
result
he
of
said
this.
organizations and networks that are supporting it. So it's already making it like conspiracy already.
Yeah. So I mean, we shouldn't be surprised, obviously. The architect of our violent political culture is not bringing the temperature down, you know.
So
That's
dumb
not
question,
shocking.
Holly. If um, and I'm not disagreeing with you about, but if you're observing that he is using it as a pretext for crackdowns on political enemies, which is to say that he is using the authoritarian playbook about this. Why are you so instinctively dismissive of the idea that it might be a false flag in order to set this up? Not a false flag organized by him, but that somebody might want to give him the pretext that he wants. Why are
Well, well, I just think these false Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is probably the rest. And this is probably a lone, I'm sure deranged person who didn't like Charlie Kirk's politics. That's probably but like you said, we don't know anything at this point. So fair enough.
I'm hoping it's a
But
spurned gay lover. Just putting that out there.
but regardless of, you know, the person's motives and intentions, um, you know, a crackdown on, you know, liberal democratic, nonviolent political activity and speech is obviously, you know, terrible and adding fuel to the fire of everything that this country is becoming. So,
All right.
well, I'll tell you a story about motives in terrorist attacks from my early childhood as a reporter on these issues. When the Oklahoma City bombing happened, everybody's initial thought that day was that it was a Hamas thing, because it came right in, or an Islamic fundamentalist thing, because it came right in the context of uh, a wave of Hamas attacks in Israel, and in fact, the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, which was the principal legislative response to it, is even after we knew what had happened, was principally directed at overseas terrorism and fundraising. That's where the material support law comes from. And I remember having a conversation with a Muslim American activist. I was then a reporter, and saying to him, come on, you and I both know that this is an Islamic fundamentalist terrorist attack. And he said, don't make assumptions about motive, Ben. You might be surprised. And about 24 hours later, Tim McVeigh was pulled over and arrested. And I have learned that lesson ever since. I have never uh, uh, jumped to conclusions about based on what makes the most sense, because in fact, uh, these are irrational behaviors that don't make a lot of sense. And, for nobody does killing Charlie Kirk make a lot of sense. And so you're dealing with an irrational act, and probably imposing the what makes the most sense frame on it, which is not to say that Holly's point is wrong, and that if you're doing statistical probabilities, you're not looking for somebody who's, maybe got some expressions of support for Bernie Sanders. But if I found that this was a rival, somebody who hated Charlie Kirk for personal reasons, or for um, uh, just was in a mental health crisis and obsessed with him for some reason. Remember, the guy who shot Ronald Reagan did it because he thought he was saving Jodie Foster from the movie Taxi Driver.
Quick 30 seconds. I talked to my boss last week. He was still at the FBI, and this goes back to your original question to me, Ben. And he did say that I said, how are things in the intel branch about counterterrorism and CI? And he did say, he's like, we're getting pulled in all directions. He said, we're getting pulled to focus on ICE and drugs. So that goes back to the incompetence versus social media. I think that they're short staffed. They've gotten rid of a lot of experienced people. I think it's more incompetence, but we're just seeing it. So just wanted to throw that out there, that there's not the resources dedicated to domestic terrorism, international terrorism, or CI. So that's a problem.
We're going to leave it there. Holly, Kate, John, we're going to be back on Monday.